Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Home in Progress by Repco Light Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And coming up on the show today, we're going to be talking about 5 can't-lose projects. Can't-lose projects that will significantly improve the comfort that you feel in your home. You know, these are put together with the idea that you found your forever home or your for quite a while home anyway. You know, they're not about resale value. They're about comfort and happiness that you and your family will feel in your home. Now that's coming up with a few other things, really good things. I'm just not going to spend any time on them because right now I want to talk about tools, and I want to do it in a way I've never done it before, from an angle I've never taken before. Anyway, you know that we tend to think of tool use as kind of a uniquely human thing, right? But nature begs to differ with us. And I ran into some really, really fun information, and I thought I'd open the show with it. You know, there are plenty of creatures out there in the wild who are fashioning, wielding, and even engineering their way through life. Here are just a few examples of this. I think this is so fun and so brilliant. Let's start with the world's tiniest little architects. Termites, termite mounds. They can rise more than 20 feet in the air, which is crazy when you think about how big termites themselves are. 20 feet into the air with walls that are 18 inches thick. And they're not just lumps of dirt. You know, they look like great big huge mounds of dirt. They're way cooler than that. Inside, they're honeycombed with tunnels and chambers and air channels that, get this, regulate temperature and humidity like a built-in HVAC system. Okay, that's cool, but it gets cooler because the design is so brilliant, so smart, that architects have copied it. The Eastgate Center in Zimbabwe, designed by Mike Pierce, uses passive cooling modeled directly on termite mounds. And it consumes about 90% less energy for ventilation than a comparable conventional building. So termites, absolutely brilliant in regards to their building. Let's move on to sea otters. I like this one a lot too. They use stones to crack open clams. All right, they float on their backs, they rest the stone on their little belly, and then they smash clams against it, and mussels and all kinds of things like that. Some otters even have a favorite rock. They probably put their name on it. They've got a favorite rock, and they keep it tucked in a pouch of loose skin under their arm so they can take it with them wherever they go. You never know when you're going to need to smash something open. They want to have that rock right there, so they keep it with them. You know, they're using stones as tools, which is really interesting, but when you think about it, they're also a hop, skip, and a jump away from having tool belts. So that's sea otters. Love that. Chimpanzees. We've probably, I'm betting you know about this one. They fish for termites. You know, they strip leaves off twigs and they dip them into termite mounds when they want a snack. And that's really interesting, but it gets cooler than that because different chimp communities have entirely different tool cultures passed down like family recipes. In one Tanzanian forest, for example, we've got 2 groups of chimpanzees. They're living right next door to each other. And they both do this fishing for termites thing with sticks like I just talked about. But one group consistently makes all of their tools wider and longer than the other ones. So you got same forest, same termites, completely different traditions, different ways to get the termites out, or different tools that they're using, or different shaped tools, whatever. In Senegal, there's another community of chimps that's invented something no other chimps on Earth do. They make actual spears, right? They get some wood or get a branch or something. They strip all the leaves off. They gnaw the tip really sharp with their teeth, and then they go hunting with it. You know, absolutely amazing. New Caledonian crows. They're the Einsteins of the bird world. In one famous experiment at Oxford, a crow named Betty was given 2 pieces of wire. All right, so picture this, 2 pieces of wire. One of them is bent into a hook. The other one is straight, just a straight piece of wire. Her cage mate steals the hook. Hey, he wants that hook. He grabs it and takes off with it. Betty, completely on her own. Nobody shows her what to do. She takes the straight piece of wire, jams it into a crack in a rock somewhere, and bends it into a hook all on her own, and then uses it to fish meat out of a tube. And she did that 9 times out of 10 when presented with that scenario. Last one I've got, Asian elephants. They snap branches off of trees, strip them down, and then shorten them to just the right length for swatting flies. You know, they're not just using whatever's lying around, they're modifying the tool to fit the job. All right, so all of that, really fun. Here's the big takeaway. It's just kind of a silly takeaway. But if termites with brains the size of a grain of salt can build skyscrapers, and crows can engineer hooks, and otters, carry around a favorite rock and they kind of got a tool belt going on, if they can figure that stuff out, then whatever you're not good at, I don't know what your excuse is. You can absolutely learn. I can learn. If the animals can figure these things out, I think we can do it, right? Because we're still better than them. We can still beat them. We can whoop them in chess and stuff like that. So don't tell yourself that you can't learn certain things, that you're too old, or whatever you're telling yourself. Whatever it is out there, if it's something you want to learn, you can learn it. All right? The animal kingdom is rooting for you. All right, if you're settled into your forever home, the home you're not leaving anytime soon, there are some projects that are basically can't-lose propositions. Let's dig into a few of them right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by Repco Light Paints and Benjamin Moore. People often think of paint as just another line item on the project supply list. But here's the thing. Everything you do, every hour of prep, every stroke of the brush, all comes down to the quality of the paint. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And we're back. This is Home in Progress by Repco Light Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And all right, I want to start with this. Here's a question for you, and just sit with it for a second or two. Just think about it. If you knew, you really knew, without a doubt, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you knew that you were never going to move from the house that you're in now. If that was the case, what would you change about the house first? All right. I'm not asking what would you fix before you sell the house. I'm not asking what will some future buyer want when you do sell the house. I'm asking basically what would you want? What's the thing that bugs you every single day? Or the space that you've always wished you had, or the project that you've been putting off because, you might be moving in a few years anyway, so I'm not going to tackle that. What would you change in your home first if you absolutely knew that you were staying? Now, that question is changing the way a lot of people think about their homes right now. And the numbers are kind of crazy on this. I ran across a number of articles that were talking about this. Homeowner spending on home improvements is projected to hit $518 billion this year, 2026, $518 billion. And that's taking into account, market deceleration, people slowing things down a little bit because they're not sure where things are going. $518 billion homeowners will spend on home improvements. And before you think it's all, just rich, fancy people, building big, expensive stuff, it's actually not being driven by the luxury market. It's not being driven by house flippers. It's not being driven by people who are getting ready to sell their homes and move on to other things. It's being driven by regular, ordinary, everyday homeowners who've decided that they're staying in their homes. They're not moving. According to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies and a 2026 survey from Great Day Improvements, nearly 2/3 of homeowners expect to be in their current home for 11 years or more. 2/3 of homeowners expect to stay in their current home for at least 11 more years. And 44% of homeowners now describe that where they live right now is their forever home. It's not a stepping stone. It's not a starter home. It's home, home, their final resting place, right? Well, not exactly that, not necessarily exactly that. But you get what I'm saying. A huge percentage of people are staying in their homes. And if you bought or refinanced during, 2021, 2020, if you did all of that when the rates were like with 3% or lower, you know why nobody's moving, or at least a lot of people aren't. If that's you, you're not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere, not with a 7% mortgage waiting for me on the other side of a sale. So a lot of people are in that boat and they're staying where they're at, or they're happy with their home, or they don't want to move for other reasons. Whatever it is, a lot of people, a large percentage, are staying in their homes for a lengthy period of time looking forward. And because of that, they're tackling projects, not so much with concerns about resale value. They're actually tackling projects, looking at things and asking, what do we really need here? What do we want? Will my family love this? Will this make our lives better for the next decade? And that mind shift changes everything about how you spend renovation dollars. So that's what I want to talk about in the next, the rest of this segment and the next one. I want to talk about a number of can't-lose projects If you're staying in your home, the home that you're in right now, staying there for the next 10 years or more, these are can't lose projects. It's not about getting resale value back. It's about improving how you feel about the home that you're in. All right, first, can't lose project is to step up your outdoor living space. In West Michigan, we have a lot of fun. I get it, griping about winter weather, right? If you're in Michigan, we always make fun of the winter weather. But our springs and summers and falls, they're really, really nice. So if you're staying in the home that you're in right now, it really does pay to look for ways to enhance that outdoor experience and really get the most out of the weather that we get and your property. And I'm not just talking about cleaning up your deck and getting some chairs out there. I mean, that's not a bad way to go if you don't have those things already there. But this could be way bigger, and more lofty than that. The outdoor living space is one of the key places that people are investing in, when they intend to stay in their home. They're building, covered structures, pergolas, outdoor kitchens, hot tub areas with outdoor safe TVs and music systems. Basically, they're making spaces that function as actual rooms. Now, these projects, I get it. They don't come cheap. But if you're staying in the home, think about it this way. What will this outdoor space do for you and the time that you can spend with your family? What's it going to do in that scope of things, from that perspective? Are you going to find yourself spending more time outside, hanging with the family, talking, relaxing, reading, doing things that you might not have done otherwise? Or think about it this way, just a slight twist on that. How many summer evenings do you have left at the house that you're in? How many is that going to be? And how do you want to spend them, versus how you're spending them now? Now, for me, when I look at it that way, that's really, really effective. I love the house that I'm in. And as we work through this segment, you're going to wonder why. Because I'm going to be very honest about the space that I'm at and the place that I live. But I love the house and I love the peacefulness of our yard. But I do not have a good outdoor living space. I have an absolutely terrible one. Our deck is devoid of chairs and seating, and as such, it never, ever gets used. We walk across it to get, from the back door onto the yard. That is all the use that deck gets. We've got 4 standalone chairs that kind of sit off by the side of the house, and we drag them around from time to time and place them on the yard or whatever. But it's not a nice sitting area. We've got shade only from the trees in the yard, not from a dedicated structure or awning or anything like that. And so we end up spending, time playing on the yard. For sure, we do a fair amount of that, but we don't spend much time just relaxing outdoors. And I know that we're wasting that area. We're wasting so many evenings. So what's your situation look like? Is that a project for you? And if your budget is too tight, for the fancy stuff that we talked about, because I don't think my budget can handle some of that stuff. But don't write this off yet. Get your deck looking good with a good cleaning and some new deck stain. Get some dedicated seating for that space. Create an area for hanging out. Buy chairs and a table if you need them. If you've got wood or metal chairs already, but they're not in the best shape, we can usually help you get them cleaned up and looking great again. So do what you can and make the most of that outdoor space. That's the first project. The second can't lose project, if you're staying in your home, is a kitchen refresh. And I'm not necessarily talking about a full renovation here. I'm really thinking mostly of a focused, smart kitchen update. Things like painting or refacing your cabinets, installing new countertops, updated hardware, maybe a sink, new sink and a new faucet. It could mean new appliances, a new floor, maybe new light fixtures. Now, in some cases, it may mean bigger things, an adjusted layout, additional cabinets, and so on. But again, even though some of those things that I mentioned don't come cheap, a lot of them don't come cheap. What comes cheap anymore? I don't know that there's anything that comes cheap. Even the cheap stuff is expensive. Even though these things don't come cheap, making these changes can significantly impact your experience in a space in your home where you spend a boatload of time, right? The kitchen. We spend a boatload of time in there. And the time that we spend in there is usually tied up in work, right? Doing dishes, making dinners, things like that, cleaning, or it's spent in entertaining. It's a high pressure time, whatever you're doing. It's high pressure, whatever you're doing in that kitchen. It's family time, it's time with guests, it's cooking and cleaning, stuff like that. A kitchen that looks good and that functions well makes your life easier. Adequate storage is something that you're going to enjoy for years. You're never going to be sad that you've spent some money to get adequate storage for all your Tupperware containers. You're going to be happy that every time you open that little cupboard up, 12 things don't fall out. A stove or a refrigerator or a dishwasher that's more suited to your family's needs is going to pay for itself in convenience over the years. And as I mentioned with outdoor spaces, even if your budget doesn't allow some of the bigger changes in your kitchen, don't overlook the value of the small scale stuff. New counters and updated colors on the cabinets is going to lift your mood dramatically. Better or updated lighting can just completely change the entire mood of the space. A kitchen that feels dated feels old, drags you down. It's a bummer to be in a place like that. I've got exactly that right now. I told you earlier. I was going to tell you about my house, and I'm going to dish the dirt. You're going to wonder why I'm staying there. But my kitchen drags me down. I've got cabinets that are the 80s oak. And I know I joke that it's coming back. It's coming back, and it kind of is. But in all seriousness, I don't like it. Not even a little bit. I hate it. They feel really old and they feel really dated, and I don't like them at all. The hardware's dated. The light fixture that I've got in there, my goodness, the light fixture. Let me tell you about the light fixture for just a second. It's a track light. It's a direct import from the 80s. It has shiny brass everything. It's got 2 to 3 lights that actually work in it. It's hideous. That's the track light. I got to get that fixed. My counters, they're old school Formica that's almost lost its original color in many places. The sink's old, the faucet's old. Everything in that space feels dated and sad and old. And when I'm in there, oh man, everything is dated and sad and old, me included. And it impacts me. The kitchen's clean, so, don't think it's at least not that. It's not a filthy pigsty. It's clean. You could eat off the floor. You could fish around in the corners, if you drop a gumball or something and pull it out, and it's not going to have too many hairs on it. It's mostly clean. But I'm not proud of the kitchen. I don't feel good being in that space. And if I'm going to stay in this house, and I am, and if I'm going to be spending on average about an hour and a half every day in that space, I think it would pay for me to make some updates so I feel better about it. And, you got to wonder. I mean, I'm sure people out there are asking, after you heard me tell all of that, you've got to be wondering, why haven't I made any changes? I can get employee discount pricing on all of my paint. Why haven't I done it? And I haven't done it because it's a lot of work. I get it's a lot of work, and I've got so many other things. There's so many excuses that I tell myself. I've got and they're excuses make it sound like they're fake, and that I'm setting up false things, false obstacles. I don't mean that. They're good excuses. They're legit. I've got a lot going on. A big yard to take care of. There's always something going at my house. We got 5 kids. 3 of them are home. See, I don't even remember how many are home. That's how much is going on. It takes a lot to keep the house functioning and moving forward. But what I need to remember is what I'm losing. What I'm losing by not tackling this project. Tackle the project, Dan. It's going to take you a couple of weeks, probably max, to get through all of that, get everything cleaned up, prepped, painted, and looking good. A couple of weeks of work, and then from that point on, I can at least feel good about parts of the kitchen. And then as I get the other parts caught up, I'm going to start feeling way better about that space. So I got to kind of move past the excuses and start getting things done. I get that. But what about you? What's your kitchen look like? If you're going to be cooking in that kitchen for 15 years or more, making 300 dinners a year or so, give or take, if you're going to be doing that, make sure it's a place that you actually enjoy being in. All right, I've got 3 other can't lose projects that I want to hit, and we're going to get to them right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by Repco Light Paints and Benjamin Moore. Think about it. You spend hours prepping, sanding, taping, and then finally painting. Don't throw all that work away with an inferior product. The paint isn't just another supply. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And we're back. You're listening to Home in Progress by Repco Light Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And we're working our way through some can't lose projects to tackle around your home when and if you decide that you're staying there, you're staying put. More and more homeowners are making that choice to remain in their current home for at least the next decade or more. That's what the statistics are telling us. And if that's you, then your idea of what to update and what to change is less about what that change is going to do for resale, and it becomes more about what will these updates or these changes or whatever, what will they do to improve the time that me and my family are spending there. We've already talked about a couple of different can't lose projects, improving the outdoor space around your home and updating your kitchen. You can't lose with those. The next can't lose project is taking a good long look at your current windows. Well, and I guess it's beyond just taking the good long look. You got to do something about it. But you've got to start by taking that good long look at your current windows. Older homes lose an enormous amount of heat through old, inefficient windows. And through attics and rim joists and basement walls as well. Because it's not just about windows. This is a bigger can't lose project. But, take a look at those spaces. Everybody's losing, if you've got an older home, you're losing a lot of heat through those spaces. Inefficient windows, attics, rim joists, and basement walls. And every single year that you stay in that house, you're paying for that inefficiency. Heat's just leaving. The cool is just eking out, depending on the time of year. And you're writing a check to cover it every month. So replacing old single pane or outdated double pane windows with modern low E glass triple pane units combined with serious air sealing and insulation upgrades in your attic, doing all of that is one of those projects that's going to pay you back every single month from the day it's done. And it pays you back in a measurable reduction in your heating bills, but also in sheer comfort, right? Because I know initially you may think, insulation in the attic, air sealing and new windows and all of that. It doesn't feel as fancy or as fun as updating an outdoor space or, updating your kitchen and all of that. And I get that, there's not this initial sense of fun from that. But think about it this way. It's not just the money saving. The money saving is real and you'll experience that. But it's also an incredible increase in the comfort that you feel in the home. You're going to eliminate drafts. You're going to keep your warm spaces warmer and the cooled spaces cooler. So you're going to enjoy the time that you're in your home more. Now, windows, they don't always pay for themselves quickly in energy savings alone, right? I don't want to convey that idea. You read that, you hear that a lot, that everybody's going to, notice all kinds of huge changes. I even said it. You'll have measurable changes. Measurable means you'll be able to measure them. That doesn't mean it's going to just be, piles of coins falling on you, or dollar bills or $100 bills just, wafting into the room. It's not measurable in that regard. It's measurable in that, oh, look, there's a little bit of savings here. You'll probably notice it in that regard. Insulation and air sealing, if you bring that into the picture, that's usually going to give you, better bang for your buck. But, the bigger picture, if you're in your forever home, all of that calculation stuff changes because you're not just asking, am I going to get this money back, when I sell? Because you're staying there, you're not selling it, at least not in the near future. So it's not about getting the money back when you sell. It's not even necessarily about getting the money back on your energy bills. It's more about making the house more comfortable every single day that you live there. And by doing that, changing out the windows, upgrading the insulation, air sealing the home, all of that is going to make the home feel better. And on top of that, just like the kitchen project, new windows really do provide an emotional lift. You just feel better about your home when you've got new windows in place. So they do provide that emotional lift, just maybe not in the same proportions as a kitchen project will. And again, like all the other projects that I talked about, if your budget, even if this is the home you're staying in, if your budget doesn't allow you to jump into a full window replacement and all of that, don't overlook what a little paint and cleanup can do. You can't make your older windows more efficient by painting them, but you can definitely improve the look and the feel of them. If you've got windows that are painted shut and they've been that way for years and years, you can get them functioning again with just a little bit of work, and a little bit of know-how. And if you're interested in that, if you're dealing with that, I've got a segment that I did on the show back in 2024 on opening painted shut windows. And it's got all the info that you need and some really good links if you want to check that out. And I'll put it in the show notes so it's easy to find. So That's project number 3. Project number 4, the can't lose project, the fourth one that I want to talk about is a basement upgrade. West Michigan homes, they're almost universally going to have basements. And a shocking percentage of them are being used for storage. Basically that's it. A water heater, furnace and all of those things. Maybe a treadmill. Hasn't moved since 2019. That's what's in a lot of basements. That and a boatload of spiders and who knows what else. A finished basement. If you can get to that level of achievement, a finished basement is going to add livable square footage without adding to the footprint of the home. Home office, guest room, family room, kids' playroom that eventually becomes a teenager hangout space when they get older. And then, a home gym when the teenagers leave. A finished basement is going to grow with you and with your family. It's exactly the kind of project that really makes a lot of sense when you're staying in the home for 11 years or more. You and your family are going to find so many different ways to use that space. You'll never be bummed that you made that upgrade. Our lower level at the home that I'm in right now is wall-to-wall paneling. Again, we're back to, the dump that Dan lives in. I love my home. I'm just being honest here. I'm looking at it with honest eyes. Our lower level is wall-to-wall paneling, drop ceiling tiles, and like everything else in the home, it feels dated, it feels old, feels like it's directly from the 80s. And yet, with all that said, it's clean, it's carpeted, and it's been an incredible space for people just needing every now and then to spread out and get away from the other people in the home. It's been really great as the kids move through their teenage years. So give some thought to that. And if that whole upgrade, again, if the whole upgrade isn't in your budget, cleaning up cement floors and painting them and then getting the block walls painted and the open ceilings painted, those things, they take work and they take some expense, but it's a fraction of the expense of a complete upgrade in the basement. And they're still going to incredibly change the look and feel of that space. We had an old Michigan basement in our first house, and I've talked about it over and over and over in the past. It was dark, it was dingy, it was gross, the laundry was there, we had a tool room at one end, and that was about it. About it for the used space. We hated being in that space. It was creepy. You were waiting we didn't know what was lurking there, but it felt like something was lurking there. So we didn't spend a lot of time there. But about a year in to owning the home, a year or two in, I cleaned all of that up, and then I painted everything. I painted the block walls with just a regular latex paint. You don't need anything fancy for that. Cleaned them up, painted them. I used Repcolite's Carefree in a satin sheen because it's economical, and that satin sheen was really going to hold up. So I did that. I painted the floors, brought in some rugs, some improved lighting. We even had the old windows replaced with new ones that could open a little bit. The whole project was really, really inexpensive in the grand scheme of things, but we went from having a space that absolutely nobody wanted to be in to a space that became the kids' playroom. In fact, my daughter Tessa, I remember one night I wake up to hear it's 3 a.m. and I hear noise coming from the basement. And I'm absolutely convinced it's an intruder. I've told this story on the show before. I apologize if you've heard it before. I've got just so many stories, and I have to just rehash them from time to time. Anyway, I heard somebody fiddling around in the basement, and panic sets in. I get out of bed. I'm gonna have to confront a burglar. I know it, so I put on my jeans. That's another part of the story. Is I didn't want to confront somebody in my underpants. It felt like that would leave me at a disadvantage, and so I put my jeans on. And serious as a heart attack here, I put the jeans on that weren't my action jeans. I have a pair of jeans that are more for working around the house, and I've got more movement to them. And I grabbed, more of a dress pair, and I actually tried them out a minute and put them back and got my action jeans out just in case. I didn't know what I was going to have to do if I had the Jackie Chan somebody down there. Anyway, I got my jeans on, headed downstairs, and I'm kind of creeping around the corners, peeking around like the police do in the police shows and stuff. And I look and I see a flashlight playing across the room, and oh my goodness, my heart's just pounding because now, of course, it's a burglar. It's 3 a.m. Somebody's in my basement with a flashlight, and I don't know how I did it, but I drummed up all of my courage and I leaped around the corner, and there's Tessa. She's like 3 years old, sitting in the dark. She was too little to reach the light switches and turn the lights on. She's in her playroom just playing away at 3 in the morning. And I attribute all of that, well, to Tessa's complete lack of fear for pretty much anything, but also to the fact that we made that space pretty nice. She didn't mind going down there at 3 in the morning to play, just a flashlight. And I attribute all of that, most of that, to the paint job. So think about that. The paint job, it can do a lot. You know, if you're staying in the house for a lengthy period of time, might be good. Even if you can't spring for the full basement upgrade, you know, just get the walls painted, get the floors painted, and it can be a big win. You know, for us, it was a huge win. That basement room, that fix-up, just gave us the extra space we needed. You know, in a tiny little house, it gave us all kinds of extra space. The place for the kids to have a playroom, and the fact that we could have a playroom there and not a perpetual playroom in the living room was a huge win. So think about your basement. Think about what a big update, you know, might do for it, you know, if you can spring for that, or even what a smaller paint-only upgrade could do. Keep that in mind. Can't lose with that one. All right, last can't lose project is to update the primary bathroom. You know, this is the spot most of us start and end every single day. And in a lot of homes, it's the room that gets the least attention because it functions fine. You know, it's fine. I don't really need to do a lot. It's fine. That's what my bathroom is. It's fine. But fine is a really low bar for a room that you use twice a day for the rest of your life, right? A renovated primary bath is a quality of life upgrade that's really hard to overstate. You know, like all of these projects that we talked about, think about it from the point of view that, you know, you're going to be here for 11 years, maybe 15 more years. Think about the fact that if you're going to stay that long, think about how much time you're going to spend in this bathroom every day, and then multiply that by 15 years, 11 years. If that's the case, if you've got all that time that you're going to be spending in this little tiny space, isn't it worth spending some time to make it work better for you, better for your family? You know, updated tile, a new shower or a tub enclosure, a double vanity, you know, if the space allows, if that's your thing, good lighting, painted cabinets, new cabinets, you know, whatever, a new bathroom fan, better counters, better sinks, better faucets. All of those improvements pay off by making the space, you know, just a better place to be. And that's incredibly worth it when you're staying in the home forever. All right, $518 billion. We started talking about that. That's what homeowners are estimated to spend this year on renovations in their home. 2/3 of homeowners are planning to stay more than a decade. Nearly half of them are calling their current home their forever home. We're in the middle of a genuine shift in how people think about the places that they live. And I think that shift is a really good thing because homes aren't financial instruments. They're where you live your life. And I love the fact that things are shifting a little bit and maybe we're spending less time, a little less money fixing the house up for what somebody else might want, you know, for resale value, and really pouring the time and the dollars and, you know, the effort into making the home exactly what we want for our families. So back to the question I asked at the beginning. If you knew you were never moving, what would you change first? Maybe this weekend is a really good time to figure that out. And to help you do that, I've got some questions that are going to make it easier to identify the pressure points in your home and where it's best to invest your money and your time. We'll get to all of that right after this. You're listening to Home in Progress, where the projects are real, the mistakes, they're educational, sometimes painful, mostly educational, and the only thing more stubborn than that old wallpaper on your bathroom wall is your determination to get it fixed. Proudly sponsored by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Paint with a purpose, people who care, and everything you need to get the job done right. And we're back. You're listening to Home in Progress, brought to you by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. And last segment, we talked about a bunch of can't-lose projects. You know, can't-lose projects. Can't go wrong with them. But even though the projects that I talked about are can't-lose, I know that budgets are what they are, and we've only got so much energy and time and focus. And so we've got to take things, you know, one at a time, and we've got to do the best project that we can in any given moment. So how do you figure out which is the right direction for you to move? Now, maybe for some of you, that's super crazy easy. and you just instantly and intuitively know which is the best move. For me, I have so many things that I identified in that last segment as places that I'd like to fix in the home that I don't know which one is the smartest one for me to pursue first. If that's you and you want to figure that out, I've got 4 questions that will help us identify which project that is in your home. First question to ask yourself, where does your house fight you every single day? All right, where does your house fight you every single day? You're not asking, what don't I like about my home? That's a different question. This one is about friction. Where does the house actually push back on your life? It could be the kitchen, where you don't have enough counter space when you're cooking. You're always running out of counter space. It's very frustrating. Is that the spot for you? That's the biggest friction. Is it the bathroom? Where 2 people literally can't get ready at the same time because, one's brushing their teeth and he hits the other person in the eye with his elbow, and then that person elbows that guy in the stomach, and then there's a brawl going on in there. Is that the main friction in your home? Is it the living room where you constantly are dragging chairs in from other spaces because there's nowhere for people to sit? Where does your house make daily life harder than it needs to be? Identify those spots. Those are your pressure points. Second question, which room do you avoid and why? You want to figure that part out too. And most of us have a room in the house, a space in the home that we avoid, or that most of the people avoid. And maybe it's the dining room table. You just stopped eating at the dining room table. Why did that happen? Maybe nobody hangs out in the living room or that family room anymore. Maybe the back porch furniture has just been sitting out there for 3 years, but nobody actually has sat in it. Maybe it's a basement that's technically finished, but nobody goes down there. When you quietly stop using a space in your home, that's worth paying attention to. Sometimes the room you've written off is actually the room that needs the most thought. Not necessarily the most money to get it fixed, just the most intentional thinking about why it stopped working. So think about that. Which room do you avoid and why? Number 3, once you think you know which space needs your attention, ask yourself this before you spend anything. Are you solving a real problem, or are you just updating a surface? New countertops on a kitchen with a bad layout is still a bad kitchen. The layout hasn't changed. The counters look better, but they don't hold any more, pots and pans or give you more space for food prep. New tile in a bathroom with no storage is still a frustrating bathroom. So think about that. Before you commit to anything, ask yourself honestly, if I fix the thing that I'm thinking about fixing, will I actually feel better about the space in a significant manner? Or am I going to finish the project and still be annoyed by the thing underneath it? Am I going to even be more annoyed because I've spent money on countertops, let's say, and I still really need to overhaul the whole layout, which could mean that the money spent on the countertops is either going to be wasted, or now you've really got to live with it because you can't let yourself waste that money and can't really fix the problem. So think about that. Are you actually fixing the problem, or are you just updating a surface? Number 4, fourth question. If budget weren't a factor and your DIY limitations weren't a factor, what would you change first? And I love this question because most of us self-limit. We draw boundaries for what's possible in our homes based on budget or skill, and we rarely consider those things again. But when you strip all of those self-limits out of the way for just a second and you spend some time in fantasy land, you can find some interesting truths there. You'll usually gain some really good insight into what's really bothering you about your home, what really might be beneficial to fix. And once you've identified what it is, then go ahead and reassert reality, because we always got to come back to reality. Reassert reality. But now you might be able to look at it and see that there are alternatives to the bigger solutions that you initially thought you needed. The things that you couldn't tackle, that you couldn't afford. You might find solutions that you can implement. Or maybe you'll realize that it's definitely worth saving up the money for, that this is the project that will have the biggest impact in your space. Just try it. It's a fun thought experiment. Now, last thing that I'll say as we get to the end of the show for the week, last thing I want to do is remind you, I probably don't even need to, but I'll remind you that there's really no better bang for your buck project than some new paint in a space. Even if you can't afford or don't have time for some huge renovation, new paint can really, really change things. And often it might be more than enough to get you by for a few years or more until you've got the money and the energy to tackle, the basement or that kitchen or whatever. So think about paint it can do a lot. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to catch it again, you can find it online at repcolite.com. Whatever you do today, make sure paint's a part of it. Have a beautiful Memorial Day weekend, and I'll see you next week. For Home in Progress by Repcolite Paints, I'm Dan Hansen. Thanks for listening.